Today we are going to talk about quite interesting policy innovation of ETS2. I think that most of you or all of you would know that this is probably one of the main new elements of Fit for 55, and it's only proper that we're going to discuss this today in Polish, I think 2030 dialogue. When I hear discussion both in Poland and on European level, I think that in many cases, Polish discussions, Polish experts, Polish politicians are kind of more aware of all the details of ETS2 compared to some other countries. So if we are now seeing some recent debates starting on ETS2 implementation in Europe, I think that in Poland, we had some of this discussion half a year ago or 1 year ago, and even then we thought that maybe we're too late because it's not enough time. But it turns out that the whole Europe, or significant part of Europe, is now preparing for implementation with very different perspectives, and we'll talk about these perspectives today with excellent panel of experts and representatives of public administration. So with that, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Paweł Różycki, who is a Deputy Director at Department of Air Protection and Climate Negotiations in Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment. Please join us. Yes. So we would also have a Czech perspective from Tomasz Jungbir-Brzozowski, who represents AMO. He's the head of climate team, and it's an independent Czech think tank. Welcome. So we have two perspectives from country level, and we'll also have two perspectives from sectoral level. And from transport sector, I would like to welcome Adam Giburza-Jetwatyński, head of Polish Office of European Federation for Transport and Environment. Welcome. And for buildings, I would like to welcome Julie Kiestrup, President of Efficient Buildings Europe and Energy Efficiency Policies Vice Chair. Welcome. Right, so let's start on different perspectives, and maybe let's start with implementation itself, because we are in the middle of it, or so to say, we should be already well after the implementation of some of the elements. And we know that we face some difficulties, delays on that front. So I would like to start with a perspective from Polish administration. So Paweł, what's your perspective on that? How Polish administration approaches the implementation challenges and how it assesses ETS2 as such.
Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the invitation. Very interesting discussion. And I'm very glad that I'm in the room with the easier topic. So I hope that it will go on very smooth. Yes, and with the easy topic on the implementation. I will start with some general approach, as we have, as a government, we have some serious doubts about start of the system in 2007. We are afraid, of course, of the impact on the households, on the competitiveness of small and medium enterprises, which is connected to the prices of future prices of CO2 allowances in the ETS2, which are still unknown. We've got just some predictions, just some analysis showing that what the level of prices will be, but we are not sure, and the impact is something that is really, I can say, terrifying us. As to be honest, we don't have still in the directive any tools that will ensure in 100% that the prices will stay at the acceptable level. We've got, of course, some mechanism connected with the market stability reserve, but still there is we are not certain that it will work properly. So the impact of the prices is something that is very important, especially the impact on the vulnerable households. As you know, in Poland we've got specific situation, and still a lot of houses using coal boilers to produce heat. And that's a real problem for us. So we don't know, we are wondering whether the system should start in 2027. Is the right moment? Would it be effective? Would it work properly? And on the other hand, maybe it's not a good moment, taking into account also the geopolitical situation. And the system will do some harm to the European climate policy. So having that in mind, of course, we are also trying to work on the implementation of the system, which is quite difficult, also on the technical level. We've got brand new system, brand new actors in the system, as the construction of the system is very different from the ETS1. So we are implementing from the scratch and must take into account various modalities and also our specific circumstances in Poland, which is of course coal. So because of coal, we've got some problems with setting the regulation point of if we will use the approach that is suggested in the directive and base the system on the excise duty, we may have 7,000, 8,000 entities in the system. So the system won't work this way, as it will be very hard to gather all information, to enforce obligations and so on. And it will be also very hard in the implementation for the entities that will be covered by the system, as many of them will be very small ones.
I think just to provide a bit more context, when it comes to coal heating, coal for households, at the moment excise is at the level of, in a sense, zero, because we are not taxing households when it comes to using coal.
Yes, still, if we will take into account also some obligation to exclude some actors from the system and so on, we have to set the level of regulation at the level that will allow us to find the entities that should be exempted and so on. So we are trying to find some point in the chain of supply that will be at the level that will bring us to the number close to 500 entities that will be covered in the system, rather than a few thousands.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, which is maybe sometimes lost for other countries that don't have a very large coal distribution system, but we don't have a few large fuel suppliers, but rather a network of small suppliers. So thank you for this
Welcome.
Double challenge which you presented. I'm wondering how it looks from the Czech perspective. We discussed a bit before the panel, and I hear that there's also this issue of cars in Czech Republic, transport. You have even a party of motorists, so it would be very interesting to hear.
All right, thank you for having me as well. I was wondering where to start in this conversation. So yeah, I'm happily to summarize the Czech position. But of course, I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, which then gives me liberty to actually refute my words and give you my honest analysis. Cars, always a big topic in Czechia. If you want to become unpopular politically, try and increase the price of gasoline, try to phase out internal combustion engine sales, or just don't touch people's cars if you want to be elected ever. So this is also the reason why the ETS2 has actually become a major political headache in Czechia. To my understanding, the current government, which is outgoing, the general election is upcoming in less than half a year, has had the intention of transposing the related legislation last summer or early last summer without actually having a public conversation about it. And then maybe looking for ways to compensate, right? So that people don't really notice that there is a price hike at the pump or something. Well, the problem is that the opposition was quite aware of the situation, and some of the oligarchs who also run the media companies have been well aware about it, and they have put the government on the spot saying, you are increasing the people's price of gasoline and diesel by up to 50 cents per liter. And by that, they actually framed it as the Czech Green Deal. So the ETS2, its impacts in Czechia are actually quite equivalent to this very nice notion of the Czech Green Deal. And by that, they have put the government into a very defensive situation where they were completely unprepared to actually argue why this is a reasonable policy, or just that it is an adopted policy, after all. Ever since, there is, finger pointing on who is responsible for this. And we've had some progress in terms of the transposition, insofar that the monitoring part of the directive has been put into laws, but definitely not the substantial one. And in the pre-election context, we do not expect this to happen, in the next year, to be realistic. So Czechia is definitely stalling. It's going to be delayed. It is part of, being challenged by an infringement procedure. Politically, this has become one of the most toxic topics you can think of.
Yes, thank you. So it's two very optimistic sides, but maybe we can look from the sectoral perspective. So looking at transport, so Adam, if you look at ETS2 not maybe as a separate policy, but rather as a kind of part of the European push to transform transport. So what's your perspective on that? What's your transport and environment's perspective on ETS2? Is it crucial? Is it just like a side note? Is it much depends on national level implementation?
I want to start just by underlining it. At the beginning, I was also surprised, as Pavel, that we were introduced as the easy topic. But then I realized that we had Czechia and Poland discussing ETS2, so I thought, that's why it's going to be easy for them to agree. That's why it's easy. But seriously, on the link with transport policy, I think there is an important element that we often forget in Poland, because we've been so used to being, the laggard in climate policy, that we forget the topics where we're actually doing not so bad. And we did this analysis in TNE last June, looking at the updated national plans, what member states are actually likely to achieve their non-ETS targets. And Poland, maybe to the surprise of many in this room, is one of the very few member states that will achieve its non-ETS targets, partly thanks to flexibilities, but Poland is doing not so bad compared to others. And why is it important? It's important because it means that if the other, and there is actually 12 member states, including very large one like Germany and Italy, that will not achieve the non-ETS targets. This will obviously have an impact on the price of in ETS2. So if there is no EU-level measures that are taken to force some reductions across Europe in the transport sector, there is a risk that the fact that these countries are not doing enough will actually impact the situation in Poland. So I think that's something that we are maybe not used to thinking about from a Polish perspective, is that in this case, it's actually in our own interest to make sure that there is strong EU-level policies that will drive down emissions in other member states, because if not, we will be the ones affected by paying a higher price than we should be in ETS2. And just to give an idea of figures, when the Commission did the assessment with the initial plans, the gap was 6.2% to the ESR 40% targets. With the revised plans, we did the assessment with GNE, the gap was 4.5%. And we think, for instance, that the greening of the fleets that the Commission announced could deliver 1/3 of that gap. So that's actually quite significant to have measures like greening of the fleets, but others like on CO2 standards, or an idea we are putting forward in TNE to have a European level platform to access low-cost EVs for member states. It's actually important to have these EU-level policies if we want to safeguard the problem that Paweł is afraid of in the ministry.
Yes, so to put it more bluntly, if we don't have European policies then, and only have ETS2, then it means that Polish households heating with coal will need to be affected to reduce emissions, while some Western European countries who like to drive diesel will just pay a bit more and keep polluting, right? So it's not optimal to look only at price mechanisms, but then again, how does it look from the buildings perspective? How do stakeholders in buildings sector think about ETS2? So Julie, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so first of all, many thanks for inviting me. And just for those who don't know us, Efficient Buildings Europe, formerly Eurace, is the alliance of companies for energy efficiency in buildings. So we represent companies who have various building solutions, just so you know who you're talking to. And you started off by saying that you think you're ahead of the game here in Poland in terms of the discussion on ETS2. And I think that's true because, frankly, at European level, we don't talk much about ETS2 at all. We talked about it back in 2022, of course, when it was put into place. But for now, I must say, it's one component of a much broader piece of regulation, of course, that we are concerned and thinking about. From our perspective, ETS2 has one very important aspect around the price. And it's a little bit ironic, of course, that we're all talking about the fact that we don't want the price to go up too much, when the whole point is to create a pain point in the system to force change, right? At the same time, of course, we agree with all the things put forward by the other members of the panels here, that we need to make sure it's carried out in a way that makes sense. But for us in the built environment, what research shows is, while the price point is important, all the non-price barriers are equally important to actually facilitate change. And so for us, what's really important by the ETS2 is that it is up and running, alongside the measures, for instance, of Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that would help facilitate a growing market. And by that, I mean stuff like the one-stop shops, for instance, because we know that in the built environment, a key barrier for people, finance for sure is one, but a key one is actually access to information about the right sort of solutions, how to go about upgrading your building stock, and also access to information about financing rather than financing itself. So it's really important for us to see this ETS2 induction as part of this sort of broader bouquet of measures.
Yeah, so basically, if you don't have this non-price barriers tackled, the price should be really high to influence decisions. So one of the ways to moderate the price is to make sure that you have complementary measures in place. So this brings me to the second question. So we already discussed perspectives, but right, so we are in the process of implementation, let's say with delay, not delay, or with additional measures on pricing. We'll maybe discuss this in a minute. But how to make this as successful as possible, how to make this implementation as effective as possible in a given country, or in a given sector. So starting with Poland, so what are the Polish ideas how to implement this whole reform, ETS2, Social Climate Fund, in a most efficient way? You've mentioned the delay, but how would that work, for instance?
Okay, so maybe I will start with the reaction to what Julie said. To be honest, I don't know what is the purpose of the ETS, because on the one hand, indeed, we have to have a tool that will force people to change boilers and so on. On the other hand, I'm hearing that is a machine to collect funds for actions in the housing and transport sector. So, and I'm not sure if we already need, let's say, a stick for people. I think that we, in Poland, we rather need a carrot, because our current actions, and it's going to be about the implementation, how we make it more effective. I will just give an example of our flagship program, Cleaner program, which shows strictly that people want to modernize their houses if we will give them some grants, some funds that they will be able to do so. So it shows that they don't need a stick, they just need a carrot right now. Of course, at some point...
How do you pay for the carrot?
Excuse me?
How do you pay for the carrot?
Yeah, of course, and there is that's what I say, that brings us to another purpose of the system, that we should collect funds to allow this. But I think that we may think about other way to collect some funds, meaning social climate funds, which is firstly also the money comes from the ETS1 also. We can use some kind of loans and so on. But that's the first step to make the effective implementation of the system, is to implement some investment programs that will allow people to modernize their houses, to buy electric vehicles, to build infrastructure and so on. And we are doing it. Like I said, Cleaner program, since the start of the program, around 1 million houses have already been modernized. And it gives us around, I think, 300,000 houses per year. So delaying the system will make us better prepared to the implementation. And of course, like I said, the using of Social Climate Fund, it will be also very important. I'm meaning investments program by also creation of some direct compensation for people that will be also needed in the system. So I think that early preparation is crucial in implementation of the system. Thank you.
Yes, so maybe just to add a bit numbers, I think we have went through from 6 million to 4 million tons of coal burned in households over the last 5 years. So you can say that it would take us around 10 years more to go to zero if we are if we keep the space. The good question is, can we be quicker, or can we, because in our Polish energy policy, we go until 2040 to actually phase out coal. So it's not like we're not doing it.
Yeah, but Alexander, if you are looking at the Cleaner program, just let me remind that the pace is increasing from year to year. So that's why I'm talking about 250, 300 houses per year. So that's the current piece of the program.
So yeah, perhaps even faster.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah, some food for thought also for planners in Ministry of Climate. But from perspective of Czechia, Tomáš, would you say that what would be like a silver bullet or the key thing to pay attention to when implementing ETS2 in Czechia?
I'm not so sure that I can any longer just speak for the government, but I'll just state what they want, right? I mean, it's actually not such a big secret. I mean, the Czech government really wants a delay. So I think that's quite aligned with the Polish one.
You have 1 year delay?
1 year delay.
Okay, after 1 year.
After 1 year, you strengthen the soft price cap somehow, or price ceiling. You somehow flex the market stability reserve to be able to cover for potential price hikes. And maybe, maybe you front load the social climate fund in some way so that you can already start using this money before the system is actually being implemented. So you get the carrots first and then only the sticks a bit later.
So you're linking this to the basically timeline of additional reforms. So you're saying that 1 more year is needed to have a bit more conversation of this adjustments, right?
I'm not saying that. The Czech government is saying
says that, yes.
So this is what the Czech government wants. I hope that in a minute we will get to the reality check of what it is actually going to get, as well as the Polish government. I mean, where are we really in the policy conversation? I think the train has left the station far long ago, but there are some open questions about it. I just want to bring our attention to the fact that the ETS2, to my understanding, and my personal understanding, is an integral part of the policy package. And the EU Commission, or the European Commission, at least maybe the other institutions neither, would be willing to back down from the overall targets as they have been agreed. I mean, 2030, that's done and dusted. 2040, proposing 90% reduction. I mean, how do you get there if you dismantle the pieces of the legislations that are supposed to be the pillars of this system? And of course, the ETS2 is part of this discussion. It is within the ESR system, of course. I mean, it's not self-standing, but should really help us to get us there. What we also like to point to, maybe that's a bit of a Czech-specific. In Czechia, almost every other household is heated by district heating. Most of this district heating is fossil-fueled. So that means in reality that it pays the price of carbon within the ETS1, while the other half of the households, which are not connected to district heating, are exempt from this price at this point. So you're actually you're making up for a distortion of the market in some way. And of course, we have seen that with the increasing difficulty of the transformation of the district heating systems, more and more people are actually trying to disconnect and, heat
it's
on their own.
It's a familiar story also in Poland, actually.
And if you don't employ such a sticky mechanism as the ETS2, you're actually encouraging this kind of behavior, which in the end is hurting not only the climate goals, but also, I think, the overall social cohesion.
Thank you. So coming back to the transport sector, I think, Adam, you mentioned the European level, but also in the end, you implement a lot of things on the national level, kind of policy mix. So I was just wondering what can be done by the national policymakers, maybe other stakeholders, local authorities to prepare for ETS2 to make sure that we have a way forward, not only paying the price.
Yes, I think the first thing to underline in this context is probably that what we can do about ETS2 is not only the Social Climate Fund. Actually, the Social Climate Fund is a minor part of the revenues that Poland will be getting from ETS2. If I look at the figures for Poland, it's about in total 30 billion euros that are going to be available to be spent, hopefully, in efficient programs, and only 11 will be coming from the Social Climate Fund. So it's important to actually plan not only what are you going to be doing with the resources you have in the Social Climate Fund, but also what are you going to be doing with the rest of the revenues that the state treasury is getting. And it's also important for a second reason, that is, I believe that one of the major policies that should be implemented to address exactly some of the fears expressed in Poland or in Czechia about the social impact of the fund is to implement a form of a compensation. It's allowed, it can be used for that purpose, part of the Social Climate Fund for direct compensation for households. But if you want to target really a majority of the population, you should use actually much more than what is allowed just in the Social Climate Fund. And if I take again the figures in the Polish case, the maximum you could use from the Social and Climate Fund in the Polish case would be about 4 billion euros. But there were studies that were done, and they showed that if you want to target the 3 lower quintiles of the populations, so that's going to be roughly the part of the population earning less than the median income. You need to be spending 50% of the revenues you are collecting. So in the Polish case, that's about 9.3 billion euros that you should be spending. So what is designated for direct compensation in the Social Climate Fund will not be enough to address the social impact. You should also look at what is available as other revenues from the state. And then the question is, how can you do that intelligently? How can you support households? I think there are several options, several ideas that have been floating around. I mean, one of the ideas could be to make a tax shift between fossil fuels and decarbonized either services or electricity. A bit of a drawback of that option is that it will be more beneficial to higher income households, actually. Another option could be to use climate dividends, like they were done in Canada, in Austria, in Switzerland, in various shape. And in some cases, actually, there is also in some of these countries some regional differentiation that is introduced, where if you are in a less well connected to the public transport system, for instance, region, then you get a higher climate dividend. So that's already a bit better, but you still have higher income households that are getting the climate dividend. What you can do to compensate that is to make that taxable, so that you get refund from part of the grant that was given. But what you could also do is to really target, and we have in Poland already instruments like Bon Energetyczny, which is targeting already lower income households. So maybe building on that, you could do something that is really targeted to lower income households. But I want to underline that I think it's important not to be targeting only the really lowest, but to be targeting, say, the lower half or the lower 60% of the population. And so direct compensation, that's one part. And then the other part is measures that will actually help solve the problem. Because that's what we have to keep in mind is if we don't want this to persist in the future, is we need to help people change their heating source, but in the case of transport, shift to low emission modes. So it can be things supporting cycling, e-bikes, public transport. You have to note that you can't use these revenues to fund road and railways infrastructure. So that's limiting what you can use in the transport sector. But still, because 58% of the emissions in the ETS2 are coming from transport, I think it would be reasonable to assume that at least half of those funds should be spent on transport. And maybe final comment in the context of this planning, what is also very important is to connect the investments you are planning in the social climate fund with reforms that will actually help to multiply the effect of those investments. So not only thinking about the investment themselves, but also the reforms that will accompany the investments.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think I will just reiterate this point about rules regarding direct compensation. We usually talk about this 37.5, but it's indeed only for social climate funds, and for good reason, because it's a redistribution between the countries. So Denmark, for instance, was not very happy just to give direct transfer to our countries without any additional conditionalities, which is once again quite understandable. But for our direct revenues, we are quite free to do what we would like to do with them. So moving on to buildings. So Julie, what's your take in terms of building, let's say, ecosystem of transition for buildings with ETS2? I think Pavel already asked this question about, is it more stick or is it a way to fund the carrot? Or maybe this is completely further different story.
Yeah, so I think back to what you were saying over here, Tomasz. The fact is, we have agreed to have a climate neutral building stock by 2050. We've agreed to be climate neutral by 2050 in Europe, politically, right? And sometimes I get the impression we're sat here discussing whether we should be that, but actually we're discussing how to get there. So we've got 25 years. That's not a lot. And in my experience, having worked in the built environment for 15 years now, a carrot on its own does not work. When we look, for instance, at meeting the targets on energy efficiency and renewables, we're broadly on track to meet renewables. We're not on track to meet the energy efficiency one. Now, which one is binding? The renewables one. It's the same with the built environment. Again, having worked in the built environment for a long time now, the renovation rate, I can tell you, still hovers around 0.2% for deep renovation, for energy efficient renovation. The rest is people getting new kitchens and bathrooms. It needs to get up to about 3% to actually meet our target of the climate neutral building stock by 2050. Now, in building terms, 25 years, that's tomorrow. That's one renovation round, pretty much. So that means that we need to get started now. Actually, we should have got started a long time ago, but we didn't. So we really need to get started now. That also means that, in my view, there is no time for delaying, because what we want to do between now and the ETS, and what we want the ETS to push towards in my sector, is to do some permanent change. So we're talking about direct compensation, for instance. I mean, in my view, that's not a good way to go about it, because those people next year or next month will have the same setup. What is much more useful is to actually invest in renovating the buildings, because by doing that and by showing they have like a heating and energy source that is renewable, and by the way, 75% of households across Europe are currently running on fossil fuels, you have a permanent change, you have a permanent lower CO2 emission, you have a permanent lower energy usage, which then in turn translates into energy prices. And that is also how you can help that part of the population who are stuck. And those numbers are rising, and that's a worry, the number of Europeans who can't afford to pay for their energy bills month on month. But we need to help them with a permanent change by using sort of a mix of energy policies rather than just focusing on the price alone. So that, I think, is very, very important. So on the Social Climate Fund, as I said, great to get that money back in. We're fully in favor of it, but also really important that we'd invested into permanent change. And if you think about the fact that ETS came out in 2022, now in 2025, it's a very different world. There's a very different political narrative, also in Brussels. There's a lot of focus, for instance, on housing and affordable housing. And again, also in that context, for us, it's really important that affordable housing doesn't just mean affordable to build and affordable on the rent. It also means affordable to run, right? So again, setting people up for an energy system and an energy bill that they can actually afford to pay.
Yeah, that's a very good point on the whole life cycle cost, especially which we've seen after the recent crisis. Also, I think it put an end to this topic of very cheap coal in Poland. After 2022, it's not cheap at all. One of the buildings, and doesn't have anything to do with ETS. I'm actually just wondering, because we have now this more dynamic part of discussion, and already Tomasz mentioned the postponing question. I'm looking at audience, and I would like to have a question to audience. Can part of audience which thinks that there will be a postponement of ETS2 raise their hands? Yeah, so if you think that it's not going to start in 2027, please raise your hand. Okay, so roughly 1/3, something like that. So.
No, I'm looking what we're doing. Yeah.
No.
I'm looking at the line.
Just to the audience.
No, it's not about what you think should happen. It's do you think it's realistic? Do you expect ETS2 to be postponed? So not we are in 1st January 2027. No ETS2 running in Poland or in your country. So if you think it's going to happen, please raise your hand. Okay, so 1/3, maybe 1/4. All right, so, and mind you, it's mostly Polish crowd, so we are hearing a lot from different prime minister, that we're going to fight to postpone, and still, I think majority doesn't think it's going to happen. So, okay, maybe we are misinformed and there's a kind of deal going on, or maybe something will change. But yeah, maybe let's go with reality check, maybe starting with Tomasz. So do you think that there will be a postponement, and how could it look? And maybe we should forget about it and move to other topics.
Okay, you mean altogether. I was trying to get a bit of a reality check on what is possible, what is feasible, what is currently in the political window, but maybe colleagues have more insights here, so I will be happy to be corrected, right? To my understanding, you cannot delay or postpone the actually implementation of the ETS2 without opening the directive in one way or another. So that is complicated. That is also potentially quite toxic. To my understanding, there is still a very limited willingness to actually go into full-on renegotiation of the ETS directive. However, in 2026, there's a dedicated window for that. But by then, the system should be up and running, or like ready to be up and running. So the question is, I mean, what does this window actually present? As I understand, Commissioner Hextra wants to have a political deal by then, so that you know the change that might happen to the text of the directive would be very targeted and pre-agreed, so that you don't open the whole box and then the genie start, you know, flying out. Because the potential is that you would end up with no ETS2 after all, which would be sad if it had happened now. It would be even worse, I think, if it had happened in a year or 2 years' time, by which, you know, companies should be ready for the implementation fully. And so I think this brings me to my biggest concern, frankly, about this whole system, and about it not being transposed by, well, still a number of countries, frankly, is that it undermines the credibility and the predictability of the EU law. And it's not the first case that has happened. We've seen this firstly with the agreement on the phase out of sales of combustion engines, which was reopened by the German presidency after it's been agreed. We've seen a similar case with the nature restoration law, which has been a closed deal and then again reopened after all of the formal trialogues. And now this would be something even more striking, because you would have a piece of legislation which was adopted, was ready for transposition. And of course, yeah, I haven't mentioned the omnibus legislation, but I guess that's the case in point right now, even more of an impact from there. So I think it would be very, very bad if we were to open this legislation, gut it out, frankly, and leave everybody in the dark, especially those who are actually preparing for this to happen. I mean, you know, those social climate plans, they're being drafted by the ministries. There's a lot of people involved in this. There's a participatory process. Even in our country, which hadn't transposed the legislation itself, we do have this process to create the social climate fund and the social climate plans. So what do you do with that then? Because of course, I mean, let's face it, there is no social climate fund really without the ETS2 being implemented. So I think, I mean, this would be quite a concern. And to come back to your question, I think there might be in the end a political agreement on a very targeted amendment that would lead to a 1-year delay of the implementation phase. That's what I understand. But I think it would have to be really limited to only this one amendment, not opening the whole directive.
And the price controls?
I think that's for the 26th review potentially. But again, that's my estimate from what I know right now.
Sure. So do we have any other gut feelings or comments or reactions? But because maybe we are being too conservative about what's going to happen.
No, I'm happy to add something on that because when you asked the question to a crowd, I was thinking, you know, had you done that in the Environmental Council before the Commission came up with its proposal, you probably would have had 2 member states in favor of the Commission proposing ETS2. And still, it happened. So now we have 2 member states that want to delay ETS2. Will that happen? Not too sure. So I wouldn't bet all my money on that, and would still advise my former colleagues in the ministry to prepare for the implementation of the ETS2 and still working on the social climate fund plans and starting to think how to use these resources intelligently. On the price control thing, there is one possible construction that could be used at national level to provide some more visibility to taxpayers and about the price of ETS. You could imagine modulating the level of the excise duty depending on whether you reach a certain threshold in the ETS2, and therefore forming at national level a sort of a corridor of prices in order to be able to say, yes, indeed, the prices will fluctuate, but within that corridor. The drawback a bit of this approach is that if it's done only at member states level, obviously anything that is done in one member state, especially in a big member state, that will limit the price impact of ETS2 in that member state, will result in a higher price in the ETS2 for those member states who haven't introduced such price control mechanisms in order to be able to achieve the target in the end. So it's a possibility, but it's also something that is a bit risky if it's not you but your neighbor, and that your neighbor is bigger that is doing it.
Right, thank you. And
yes. So first of all, I think that regarding the credibility, predictability for the actors, I'm not sure whether, in the sake of predictability, credibility, we should stick to the agreed legal acts no matter what. We see it even now with the industry. We've got ETS2, we've got the whole climate policy. Still, we are talking about Clean Industrial Deal, Steel Action Plan, Chemistry Action Plan. So we are looking how to improve the situation of industry because it's losing its competitiveness versus EU versus the rest of the world. So, and it's also caused in some part by the climate policy. So I think that implementing the system as it is, we may have the same discussion about ETS2 in 2030, 2031, 2032, or something like this. How to fix the system. And coming back to here and now, I think that we have already started the discussion on the ETS2. We've seen the Czech position. France is also advocating for some changes in the ETS2, Slovakia, and so on. So we've got some countries that are seeing the problem, and I think that the approach, how to fix it, is of course different. Is within the member states. The advantage of changing just price mechanism is that it can be partially done without touching the directive, because it can be done only by changing the MSR decision partially. So I think that that's the huge advantage, but the delay of the implementation of the system is also part of the discussion right now.
Right, and I think Julie wanted to...
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I'm representing industry because we're also industry, right? We're the green industry. Anything basically that creates unpredictability is very unwelcome. We want to know where we're going. We want to know by when we need to be where, and we want to then follow up on that. And so you just mentioned it before, and if we sort of elevate this discussion back to what we sort of discussed this morning as well, this whole sort of notion of sort of green versus competitive, right? That there is sort of a choice to be made and a dichotomy to be made, I think is very dangerous for Europe. And for us, for sure, this sort of reopening of the ETS2, we've got the omnibus now, there's rumors about the ED. I mean, that undermines what we've agreed and what we're planning for as European industry, right? And that is a real concern to us, and that is not something that that fuels our investments, because we simply don't know if what we do today will then be relevant tomorrow. So from that perspective, I have no prediction on whether or not the ETS2 will be postponed or not. But for many of us in industry, the worst thing you can do to us is to reopen things that are settled and that we're preparing for and investing against.
Right, so I think that we have a nice separate positions, but I think that your point on your predictability of ETS, it's also kind of important that it predicts the amount of reductions. Yeah, so the price is less predictable or unpredictable. So if there is some small adjustment, maybe this will be some kind of price control, not postponing the system. This can be in the, let's say, in the middle of the road. But maybe to move on to the world, how to deal with the world when you don't have a major decision to cut the ETS2 or to postpone it by 3 or 5 or 10 years, whatever, but rather that we wake up, it's 1st January 2027, there is ETS2 in each country. So the question would be once again, how do you avoid the public backlash? Because I would say that ETS2 compared to ETS1 is being done completely in a different dynamic. So with ETS1 we had 10, 15 years of low prices, and then it started to increase. And for most countries it already was quite decarbonized system. And here we have like one day you don't have ETS2 and suddenly next day you have ETS2 and can be 30, 40, 50 euros, we don't know. So how do you manage potential public backlash that from one day to another you have suddenly a new carbon price? So do you lean into this support for households? Do you provide subsidies? Do you communicate? Do you maybe invest in clean? Do you lower the prices of electricity, for instance, as a way to provide a path forward? So what would be your suggested way to deal with the 1st January of 2027? Looking at maybe...
I mean, I think all of the above, right? It needs to be a mix. I mean, we absolutely need to make sure we've got a range of tools available. And that's also why I keep on coming back to the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directives, because there are a number of tools in that is also about to be implemented across member states, and that will help, because of course we can't just drop people off a cliff. That's also not what I'm suggesting, but we do need to be clear about the fact that the cliff is coming, and here are the here are the tools and facilities to help them. And as I said, part of that is a social climate fund. It's this notion of these, sort of technical support, which sounds very, very boring, but means sort of this notion of making sure that people out there actually have access to the right technical information and the right financing innovation. It is something about sort of regulating the electricity prices to make it attractive to actually invest in these technologies. So it needs to be a combination of all the above. But communication sounds really banal, but I think it's actually a really important part of the discussion, because we're talking obstacles here, we're talking threats, we're talking about how complicated it is. But going back to the discussion of this morning, if we don't believe and communicate accordingly that green for us is synonymous with competitive and therefore with a future for Europe, how on earth are we going to get our politicians along on that journey? And, we're sat here literally in sort of almost a bunker, right? I mean, I work for a daylight company. I mean, we're talking to each other here and we don't even agree. So how are we going to get all the people out there to join us in this journey if we don't communicate sort of clearly and strongly that this is the way we're going and you're coming with us? And we're going to make sure you're going to come with us in a speed that suits you, but this is the direction we're setting and this is the path we're following. And I really think that communication there plays a major, major role in making sure that the population at large will join us. Now, they won't all join us. That will be naive. But that is also not how policy works. We have to have a group of people join us, and then we need to go ahead. Because if we're waiting for everyone to agree, we won't be getting anywhere. And that's a little bit what's happening.
Yeah, it's a good point of communication. I just come back to what Tomáš mentioned. It's in Czech Republic, saying that no one is using ETS2 or is like not word buzzword. It's rather like Czech Green Deal. So we basically put a label on it. So do you think it would be possible to have a kind of reverse of that? So basically have, as in Poland, we have clean air program, we have a lot of different nice things which we can buy with ETS money, but also, some of the things which we would like to phase out. So is it possible to have a kind of reverse narrative on that? So not ETS2, but rather what we would like to achieve with ETS2.
Sure. Good luck with that politically. I mean, it's a monumental task to put this on its head and get a positive narrative out of it. But I very much agree with Julie. I mean, you cannot really get around it. I think really the main problem that I'm trying to call out here is like, if the governments were not transparent about communicating this in time, I mean, they're just shooting themselves in the foot, and it's going to make the situation much more difficult by 2027. So I think just be open, be transparent, and speak about the potential balancing mechanisms, I mean, whichever they may be, that are in place. But if I bring it back to the Czech political reality, and I mean, here again, I have to somehow project my own preferences and ideas. I mean,
please do.
Yes. So the Czech conservative, center-right conservative government has been extremely anti-social in implementing the climate policies. Regardless. But in any case, it had definitely not helped to meet the motto of leaving no one behind. Quite to the contrary. So what people see is that within the context of the energy crisis, you have a bunch of oligarchs and big utility companies getting extra revenue, and people just paying, most people paying extra bills. I mean, this really sends the wrong signal, right? So if we want to discuss about how to make this palatable, I mean, first of all, yes, you need to have the investment options, and you need to finally speak about the fact that this is not only costs, it's about revenues that you get out of the system, and then those revenues you want to actually channel back to the people in the form of investment support or whatever. But you also have to be quite open, I believe, speaking that climate policies have to be coupled with tax policies and social policies and security systems. And you cannot deal with those in isolation. And of course, the narrative, that's part of the story. I don't think this is a lost case, because in the end, I don't think the impacts on the people's wallets will be so immense, and at least not immediately. Right now, we're in a situation when the gasoline is as cheap as it's been for, I don't know how long, 20 years or something. So if it had, actually increased by 10 or 20 cents by now, nobody would really take a notice. But let's see what the situation is in the 2 years' time. But I think, I mean, there's, in the end, like no way around it. You have to be quite open about the policy options that are on the table. And you need to actually link this to other policy instruments.
It's, yeah, that's a good point, but I always remember in this context, there's like a very nice graph of approaches to carbon taxes versus trust in public system, public policy. It's kind of basically like a almost perfect correlation with countries which trust in public policy. They say, yes, carbon taxes are a nice idea. And when you don't trust politicians, you say, no, they're just taking money outside. So, and if when I look at ETS1 revenue use in Poland, actually, we haven't used that much money to support transition. It was just general budget money. So maybe people are sometimes, at least sometimes, right.
Yeah. I think that's not even limited to carbon tax. I mean, it's any tax, right? I mean, if you believe your government knows what it is doing and you support it, or I mean, you support the institutions, so you have basic trust in them, then you're fine with being taxed. If you don't, I mean, then you don't want them to take money out of your pocket. Czech case, what we have is a positive example. Let's be quite practical here. There's this Green New Savings Program. It's one of the most successful ones, to my understanding, around Europe. It's been piloted, 15 years ago, maybe longer. And a big chunk of the ETS1 revenue goes there. It's an investment scheme for household insulation, change of heating source, etc. It's been working really well. The only issue with this is that it was mostly utilized by the middle class, because those have the means and the capacity to actually write the projects and get the funding on board. So what you really need to do is scale this up through, I mean, you know, lower thresholds, consulting, etc., for the less well-offs to be able to access this. And one of the big question marks here, and I would be actually curious to hear Julie's insights into this, is, well, how do you actually make these things happen in tenants relationships, in households where people are not owning, but instead are renting their place, and therefore they have very little control over what's happening in terms of some investment, and they're just paying the bills, right?
Yeah, and of course, by the way, I've heard the story about the Czech system many, many times at different conferences, so it is one of these sort of examples that we like to show off. But the owner-tenant issue is very live, and it's very difficult to do anything about it, because to your point, the people who get the benefit from the lower energy bill are not the same as the ones who are actually paying. So there are parts of a new EPBD that basically look at forcing landlords into upgrading the overall performance of the building. So that would be one way to go about it, but it is complicated. I would also say to the sort of the relatively well-off, whereas the not well-off, again, you're completely right. It tends to be the people who are a little bit more sort of just also information literate, who are able to access the funding. Back to the importance of the one-stop shops, by the way, and making sure that you find a system that works. And by the way, when I say shops, some people might be thinking of physical shops, and some member states they are. In Hungary, for instance, in Budapest, they literally have, like, in different neighborhoods, like a shop you can go into and you can talk to various people. In other ways, this is like an electronic format, like an online platform. But I think the point here as well is that people, not just across member states, but also within member states, have very, very different needs. And that's one of the things that's very complicated in building policy, because everyone lives somewhere, but where they live and what their needs are so different. And that's why it's so important to have that local component to everything you do. But what I did want to say is, like, also through Efficient Buildings Europe, we are involved in the Renovate Europe campaign, which has a number of national partners, including here in Poland. And one of the things we're looking at is to scale up renovation also in social housing, and to look at how we can use, again, best case examples from certain regions and cities, and use that across. And that, I think, is an example of a non-legislative lever, by the way, that we feel really, really makes a difference when we're out there. It's really sort of just showing people how to go about things. Because I think, back to your carrots, I mean, I agree. I think most people are actually, in theory, interested and willing, but we need to make it as easy as possible to get those good ideas executed, whether you sit in an authority, or you're like a private household, or you have like a rental, a building. And so that is really, I think, where we could do a lot of work, both with the instruments of EPD, but also directly as sort of actors out there.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a good point on buildings. My question would be maybe to Adam or to Pavel, like looking both from your experiences in public sector, but also now outside. Question to Adam. I think we had these examples of France introducing carbon taxation. At some point, there were yellow vests. Then previous Polish government introduced some levy on fuel taxes. No one much cared. So we just had this opłata niskoemisyjna or whatever it was called. So it seems that there's a lot of issues connected to broader trust, to broader narrative, as we were mentioning, to maybe transparency, or do people see a sense in the policy introduced? So we've been talking about building sector, but how do you think it translates also to the mobility? Yeah? So basically, how much you pay at the pump? Do you have any suggestions for policymakers who need to introduce ETS2?
Well, so I think the issue with the communication on European level legislation very often is that what you need to say in different countries may differ. And it's difficult to have legislation that addresses all the concerns of all the population. I mean, it's in every single member state. And obviously, once in one member state you explain it one way, you know, in another member state you still hear what has been said over there. So it has to be coherent. So I think it's maybe for national level measures, and the example you quoted is an example of that. It was like independently introduced measures in France and in Poland that were communicated totally differently. And for that reason, maybe for that reason, they were also perceived differently in the society. So yes, maybe communication can do something, but I think it's possible when it's a national level measure, but when it's an EU level measure, maybe it's more difficult. That was my point. But I think there is also another difference in terms of the situation between France and Poland from this, from the example you gave, that also explains a bit this different reaction. Is if you look in statistics, and to simplify a bit, in Poland, really poor households don't have a car. In France, you have a lot of poor households that own a car and need a car, because we are complaining in Poland about how we have lost a lot of public transport connection, and it's true. But in many areas in France, it's even worse. And so the impact that is felt in the society of the price of gas is even bigger. So you have these objective differences also between member states that will explain some of these different reactions.
So you have, in many cases in Poland, just transport exclusion or deprivation, that you just can't travel, or you need to ask your neighbor to travel. And yeah, I think we looked also at the institute, and it's this costs, additional cost, if you would have a car, is really indeed skyrocketing for the poorest households. But we don't see the impact because they just don't own the car and they don't have an option for public transport. I don't know if Pavel has any reactions from, once again, the one who faces the challenge of actually implementing this?
Yes, sure. So I'm going to the 2027, like you said. We've got ETS2, and I won't be original. I fully agree that the perfect solution is to create some sorts of investments programs and prepare people to improve energy efficiency of houses and so on. But on the other hand, like you said, it's something that can be done in 1 year. So we definitely will need some kind of system of compensation for society, and it should be a combination of measures. So on one hand, investments programs and all kind of policies that will help people to modernize their houses, to change their cars, and so on. And on the other hand, as a complementary system of direct compensation. So I see it that way. And as regard the information, it's of course very important, but I've got the impression that we are informing a lot, we do a lot of talking, but people have to see that something is benefiting for them or for their neighbor. And if they heard that from their neighbor that something works, it's fine, I've got cheaper energy and so on, that works for them. Because if they won't see any change, they don't care. Because I think that how it works, and it's the same with the whole climate change idea. We are showing and people seeing that we've got very hot summers, droughts, floods, but then we have one day with -10. There is no climate change. So they have to see that something is working and to be convinced that it's worth for them to invest to change something. So yeah.
I have a quick question before we'll move to questions from audience. Today in the earlier panel we had idea that maybe we should utilize ETS revenues for grid investment, but overall I think we also have this issue of unequal taxation of electricity, clean electricity and fossil fuels. So do you think that, well, for ETD we need to have everyone agreeing on something, and for 20 years plus we haven't agreed? So maybe this is indeed a kind of ETD in disguise, and we can just reuse some of the revenues to decrease the taxes on electricity. So we'll have higher prices on fuels and lower prices of electricity, or either taxation or grid charges. So do you think that would be a nice combination? Is it discussed, I know, in Czechia or in transport and environment regarding electromobility, or in Poland, or how is it something which is on our radar?
I mean, clearly, it's a huge issue that it is way more costly to use electricity in terms of taxation than gas. I mean, in Belgium, for instance, where I live, it's about 4 times higher taxed. And so that, of course, undermines then the financial incentive, for instance, for getting a heat pump. And so clearly, something needs to change here. And to your point also, that we're changing at European level, because we've tried to open these that have all finalized rather than energy taxation for many, many years. So I think some sort of combination whereby you, well, try to even out that difference is crucial.
Yeah, so any other points from? No quick reactions. Okay. So maybe now we can turn to questions from the audience. If you can have, please raise your hand. I see 1 hand, 2 hands. Perfect. So maybe one question at a time, please. Please introduce yourself.
Urszula Stefanowicz from Climate Coalition, and I wanted to ask about social climate plans and what they should include. Governments are working on them now, and there's a debate going on about including reforms in the plans. I believe this is a crucial element, because without the reforms, without that element, just investments may be not effective enough. And I believe, for example, in transport, in Poland, reforms are very needed for public transport system, starting from something as simple as reducing the taxation for public transport that was already promised, or the reform of the bus fund that we have, or a lot of other things. We can reform, for example, costs of using road infrastructure and railway infrastructure, which is very unequal right now, and other reforms that basically serve to support and strengthen the investments that will be used. What do you think should be a role of the plans in that aspect?
So that's a perfect question. I think that the formal name in the European law is now called measures, not reforms, which is maybe a bit unfortunate. So it provides some flexibility, but maybe we should treat them as reforms and indeed ask ourselves how we spend the money. So would anyone be willing to connect? To comment on that? I think Adam also...
Well, I commented on that in my intervention, so I totally agree with you that there needs to be reform and they need to be correlated with the investments that are foreseen in the plans.
So, Pavel, what's the Ministry of Climate?
Yeah, I also agree that we need some reforms, but I'm not sure if it should be the part of the exact document of the social climate plan. So I think that it should be discussed along the plan, but not be included in the plan. But because I'm pretty sure that if we will start talking about some deeper reforms, we will stuck with the plan for years.
I would like to ask a follow-up question because, yeah, it's. I think there's a very important technicality that if you include the reform in the plan, then the Commission may ask you, where's the reform? But from the perspective of ministries which want to to introduce reforms, isn't it sometimes easier to have this type of reforms in the document which is agreed by the Commission and you have some clarity on this? Or you may want to answer this question, or you may say no comment, but please.
No comments, but I will try. No, we will have, of course, social climate plans, but also, even more important for us, national energy and climate plan that will also cover some policies and measures, let's say, in the, because that's the definition. Yeah, but we are talking about some suggestions, some plans for not the reform itself, because if we are talking about the details of the reform, and I was referring to the very detailed reform that shouldn't be included in the plan, but some suggestions, some indication for the future, yes, it should be included, but I'm pretty sure that most of such actions will be included in the NECP.
So maybe a quick question to Tomasz. Is there an appetite in the government, in the ministry, to have some reforms in the plan?
I actually have to say I know very little about it. It's my colleague who is part of these working groups. And so my understanding of the social climate plans is very generic, I would say. However, the topics that we've covered, I think, for instance, the obligations of the owners of houses and apartments who are renting those out in terms of renovating, in my mind, that's something that ought to be there because it's an integral part of the policy package that you want to implement. And without it, I mean, you're not really hitting the nail in the right place. But to what degree this will be, this has to be in the same document, or to what degree this should be considered as binding, I do not have insight into.
Right, so maybe we can collect the second question.
Good morning, Ewa Sufin-Jacquemart, Fundacja Strefa Zieleni. My question concerns energy efficiency in buildings. A few years ago, at the conferences here, we presented as model a French model of Agence nationale pour amélioration de l'habitat to fight against energy poverty and raise the quality of habitat. And their model is based on the triangle between the local government, this agency, special agency, that takes all the money from ETS2, and the network of independent advisors, and that come to people with very low income and very, very low income. And so they addressed very much women, because we're victims of energy poverty, majority they're women. And this advisor is from the beginning until the end with the person or the family. That means during the process of energy audit, diagnosis, what must be done, how the funds must be used, looking for enterprises to do the works and so on, until the last documentation that must be produced and so on. And French, they do it for 10 years already with something like 120 renovations a year, addressed to low-income and very low-income people. And they make evaluations of the process. And in these evaluations, they discovered that the most important factors are those advisors. They guarantee the success of the operation. So my question is to our minister, did you think about the system advisors? I made a quick calculation. We have something like less than 3,000 entities, territorial entities, gmina. If we count 150,000 zlotys a year for to pay an advisor, to have a network of advisors like this, it would be something like 450 million zlotys a year. So my question is, do you have any idea how could we provide this network of advisors to make the system efficient? Because without this advice, if it's only advisors from companies, it will never work well. And because companies will rather sell their products, so they will, so it will be not independent and efficient. And if it's only partial during the works, or, for audits or for money, or so that they will be lost in the process. And for low-income people, it's simply infeasible.
So
it's too complicated.
Question on advisors for low-income households. I would ask Paweł, but also then maybe Julie on other good practices.
Okay, so in Poland, the agency that is collecting all ETS revenues is called Ministry of Finance. But despite that, I think that we've already have maybe not similar system, but some kind of system with energy advisors in voivodeships, just for exactly. Thank you, Adam. So I think that it's already in Poland. There is something like this, and now we are also introducing the idea of operators in the cleaner program. That will also help people to do their improvement in energy efficiency of houses from the scratch to the end. So I think that we've already implemented somehow this idea, and we are going further with the implementation also.
So very much work in progress. And
yeah, no, just a couple of points of it. First of all, great example, and you know, one thing that's sometimes very frustrating for me is there are lots and lots of really cool examples, and I hear them everywhere, but also you're talking about 120 households per year. I mean, think about how many households I have just in France. We really, really, really need to scale that up. Oh, okay. We still need to scale it up, but that is already better. But the point is, the answer is the one-stop shops that I've mentioned, because that is exactly that. That is, you know, sort of a go-to entity where you can get independent and integrated advice, because actually it's not the companies providing the obstacle. You know, the number one go-to person today is your installer, right? If your gas boiler breaks, you're going to phone, you know, a gas boiler guy, technician, who in turn is going to recommend another gas boiler. And that is where we need to catch people. It's when people have an intervention, they've just moved, they've just renovated, they're renting out, you know, they're changing the purpose of the building. That's the exact point, and that's what they're trying to hit as well with the EPPD, where you need to reach people and say, tell you what, if you change your boiler and you insulate and you do then that integrated solution will cost you this, and it'll be paid back in this time. Because when we look at the Commission's own data, from their own impact assessment, that really is the number one issue. And we were just talking about a lack of trust. People have sky-high levels of trust actually in the installers, because it's also typically an area where people don't know, right? So those people, the people that you phone when your dishwasher breaks down, they're actually crucial, because they are the ones who can really sort of make or break it in terms of providing the right advice.
Right, thank you. So with that, I think we run the course of the panel, and just reiterate the importance of trust, reforms, and preparations for 1st of January 2027. I would like to thank all the panelists, excellent discussion. I would like to thank audience for a very active participation, and give floor back to Zofia. Thanks.